Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Africa Investment Partnership Forum. Good evening. This is call and response. Good evening. Aha, now I have your attention. My name is Mark Edo and I'm going to be your traffic warden this evening. I want to begin with the necessary protocol. Perhaps at this UN General Assembly, the one person, our fellow African, that is the most in demand is in this room today, chose to be here. Please let us welcome again President Ruto and the First Lady to the first African Investment Forum with the theme Africa Beyond Aid, a win for all. And congratulations, Your Excellency, on your win. Now, I'd also like to recognize His Excellency Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the AFCFTA Secretariat. UNDP Administrator Akim Steiner is here with us, also a very busy man at UNGA. UN Regional Bureau for Africa Director Ahuna Eziakonwa, our co-host, is also here. You'll hear from her later. We will have His Excellency Mahamadou Issoufou, former President of Niger and the African Union AFCFTA champion, with us momentarily. We also have with us members of the UNDP's partnership platform for the private sector called the African Influencers for Development, who co-convened this event and sponsored it. I'm going to ask a few of them to stand up and be recognized. Samba Bachili, please stand up. Samaila Zubairo is here, representing Mr. Benedict Orama Hippolyte Fofak of Efrexim Bank. Who else? Tiggy, come Tiggy. If you are a member, Tiggy, please stand up. Do we have any other members in there? Yes, Edem Azogeno, the secret force behind many of the new initiatives like Panabios, all here. This is our constellation of superheroes who are doing super things. Thank you very much, African Influencers for Development. You are influencers indeed. I also would like to recognize Tony Elumelu, Chairman of Hares Holdings. James Mwangi, Founder and Chairman of Equity Group, is here with us. U.S. government representatives are here. There's a different U.S.-Africa relationship. We're going to hear about that tonight. We have members of representatives from USAID, other multilateral agencies, DFIs, sovereign wealth funds. We have family offices. We have banks, and we have investors here. Members from across the spectrum of finance. If I've forgotten anybody, there's just too many of you to mention. I just want to say welcome to you all. Now, I'm so excited to do this because I think that this group is probably, I've never seen an eclectic mix of people like this. And the idea behind tonight is to pull together people who have a red thread going through their hearts. And that is, we know we can make a difference, and we know we can develop Africa together with the right partnerships, the right collaborations. Finance, investment, and investment of yourself is what we need. And we have no one better than, I think if I dare say, Your Excellency, I thought that your campaign self-moniker was arguably the best one I've ever heard. The Hostler-in-Chief. That sounded very strong. But you are a champion of the underprivileged and who are often the invisible. And for that, we're very grateful. That's the theme of Africa Beyond Aid, a win for all. It leaves no one behind. So God bless you, Your Excellency. Now, I am Mark Edo, and someone described me as an Afro-Saxon. I'm Nigerian, raised in Nigeria till I was 18, and partly British. But my heart is in Lagos, and the governor of Lagos State is right here, Samuel Sanwo-Olu, and the governor of Ekiti State is right next to him, which is right next to Lagos State. Very, very welcome, all of you. Now, before I begin, I want to just say that when I was thinking about how I'm going to handle this eclectic mix of wonderful people, I went to Ahuna Eziakonwa, the director of UNDP Africa, and I went to her and I said, what should I do? Give me some tips. And she said, well, Mark, just two things I have to tell you. One, wear your best traditional. And two, don't talk too much. It's for you to do the talking. So let's get the proceedings started. Now, climate, conflict, COVID, Sometimes it feels like we are living in the age of uncertainty. There's a multitude of crises and challenges we're facing, not just in Africa, but across the globe. It's called into question so many things that we took for granted. It's called into question global supply chains. It's called into question the dependence on just a few countries for food, for energy, for goods. It's made a mirage of the economic growth that we've all been harking on about, growth that sometimes has no social dividends. The Washington Consensus failed, multilateralism is in question. So this is it's hard to be optimistic with such a misty optic, but we are optimistic. What's the future of overseas development, for example? Overseas development assistance, ODA. Where is development going? We're here at UNGA. I can't answer that question, so I'd like to invite as the first speaker our co-host, the UNDP administrator, Mr. Achim Steiner.
So you have to surrender a microphone? No, here. Thank you, Mark. Your Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Madam Raquel Ruto, First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency Mamadou Yusufu, who I think will be joining us any moment, but I want to recognize him also, former President of Niger, but also the African Union champion of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and to my dear friend Wankele Mene, who is the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, to all of you who have come together here this evening, to my colleague Ahuna and the team that have, together with the African Influencers for Development, assembled us here during this UNGA week to think about something that, dear colleagues, is very close to our hearts. The world is struggling. The world is struggling with itself. The world is struggling economically. We are just emerging out of a pandemic and we are sliding straight into a global recession. We are seeing the fruits of sometimes extraordinary creativity and resilience on the African continent during the pandemic, in a sense withering away against the backdrop of growing debt, inflation, growing interest rates, and therefore an economic outlook that, particularly for an incoming president, but also for anybody who is invested in development in Africa, must be a sobering outlook. This is not an easy moment. And yet, one reason why I think it is so important for us to be together here is to also be an antidote. There is much that is not going right in the world, but there is much that we have learned in recent years also. People, citizens, entrepreneurs, the markets, the private sector, the hustlers, as you said, Mr. President, can do while the world sorts itself out. It doesn't make it easier, but it doesn't make it impossible. One reason why UNDP has increasingly invested its own resources in terms of becoming more literate, more capable, and also more intelligent in understanding that economy that we often describe as maybe an informal sector, a startup sector, or the private sector very generically, is that we have recognized that in so many parts of the world, it is not a parallel universe. It is what in essence underpins any country's economy. And whether it is informal, formal, whether it is small, medium-scale enterprises, whether it is large-scale and more industrialized enterprises, these are the engines of development, of growth, and ultimately also of enabling countries to, in a sense, not only wait for resources from outside. And one of the reasons why UNDP 3 years ago began to invest in its own sustainable finance hub is that we also recognize that far too much of Africa's own capital tends to leave Africa and invest itself in the global financial centers for lack of opportunity. And the way we can try and bring more dynamic into that, the more governments are able to tap that capital, the more they will also be able to tap into the extraordinary international capital resources that largely tend to bypass the African continent to this day, whether it is ODA or whether it is private sector investments. Let me end by just saying that we are also learning an extraordinary amount, and here I have to say I have been a student of Kenya during the many years that I lived there, and I continue to do so. And again, as I was there just a few weeks ago, I was stunned to learn that not only has the digital economy in Kenya continued to go from strength to strength, it has begun to connect across the African continent. The kinds of networks we see now working across different markets and boundaries is phenomenal. Innovation is exploding across Africa. and the digital platforms are extremely important. But it's also what they bring to the larger development arena. For instance, artificial intelligence, the ability to look at opportunities and then come down to something as basic as pricing risk. I know James UNGA is here, Tony Lomelo is here. I was telling them yesterday about a partnership that we just signed with Milliman, a company that most of you will never have heard of. They are one of the leading companies that helps insurance companies, investors to price risk. Africa is a victim of mispriced risk in so many ways. So as UNDP, we work now with these entities in order to open up, in a sense, a universe of investment that hopefully will allow all of you to come out of this evening and with all the experience that you bring to this table also with a message of hope and optimism despite everything that is happening around us. And in that sense, please consider us in the United Nations Development Programme a partner, a companion, a co-investor, and a shared risk holder also. Thank you so much and have a fantastic evening.
Thank you, Achim Steiner, Administrator for the United Nations Development Programme. Now, without much ado, we're going to get going, and I'm going to invite the man of the moment. I called him a champion of the underprivileged, of the poor, and he certainly is that. And that's powerful, simple message resonated with millions of Kenyans. But I would say I would go beyond that, because where Kenya goes, Africa follows. And as an African, as a Nigerian, and many, many different Africans here, we were watching closely, and we were empowered by what we saw. Your victory empowered us. So without much ado, I'd like to invite you to join me on the stage for a little fireside chat. Now, there is no fire. You and I are going to generate it. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's begin. So what I would want to do is maybe for 15, 20 minutes, you and I can have a little chat. I can ask you some questions and they will listen. And then afterwards, I'll invite a couple of people on trade, finance, and development. And we can spread the conversation a bit wider, maybe take one or two interventions. I see there's some really interesting people in the crowd. I mentioned the two governors here. I see FinDev Canada over there, Afrexim Bank there, African Development Bank over there, Kola Adeshina from Sahara Group. There's quite an assortment of individuals, and I'm sure there'll be an assortment of questions. I'll go straight to it. It says, Africa Beyond Aid, a win for all. Everybody here wants to collaborate. No more silos. So we're here for partnerships. What message do you have for those that want to invest in Africa and become partners?
First, Mark, thank you very much for inviting me into this great audience. And thank you very much for thinking positively about the hustlers.
I'm a hustler in training.
They are the characters who put me in office. And speaking about our elections, it speaks to the heart of the democratization of Africa. That we can go to elections, we can finish our business with elections and get back to work. It speaks about not just Kenya. I mean, of course, it speaks to Kenya that we are a democratic country based on the rule of law with an open market economy. And that is our signature as a country. And that is the future of our continent. As we democratize our politics, we must democratize our economies as well, so that we can be in tandem with the rest of the world. Why invest in Africa? That's your question. I think Africa is the destination of the future. You could comfortably say Africa Beyond Aid into trade and investment. I think that's really the logical order of things if you're thinking about Africa. And let me say this. Africa is the continent that has the largest growing population. 1960, a population of 280 million. We are now a population of 1.3 billion. That is actually almost 17% of the world population. A decade from now, 20% of the population of the world, and by 2050, a quarter of the people of this globe will be living in Africa. What does that mean? It means two things. It means you have market and you have labor. And those are the two most important things any investor should be looking out for if you want an investment destination for the future. That is why Africa, we can actually comfortably say that today, Africa as a proposition is a bankable proposition. That is what, that's why people should be considering, investors, entrepreneurs, business people should be considering Africa as a destination for trade and for investment. And let me say the following. Africa, apart from population, Africa is home to the largest possible untapped resources. Arable land, not geothermal, but not necessarily geothermal, but green energy resources and natural resources, 30% at least of the world's natural resources. So again, that makes Africa a destination for any investor to think about. Let me say without a doubt that Africa has the potential to be the epicenter of trade and investment of the future.
That's wonderful words. That's what we want to hear. What do we need to do differently now? My father used to say, never waste a good crisis. Never waste a good crisis. And we are indeed in a perfect storm of crisis. But with that comes opportunity. But as you're now the president of one of the most powerful countries in Africa, you're a global leader. Tough time to be a president, I would say. It's good you're young. But you know, what should our priorities be with regards to engaging differently with the international financial community, with the untapped resources of African capital, which often flies out of Africa and is invested in other countries abroad? What can we do better? I know I was with Strive Masiwa yesterday. Strive Masiwa was saying we need to start communicating better. That's one thing. But what do you think? What can we do differently?
I believe that any business person with an eye for opportunity can see through all these challenges and crisis and actually see the opportunity for what it is. Agriculture is the biggest potential exists in Africa. The largest potential of agricultural productivity today lies in Africa. Why do I say that? 60% of arable land is in Africa.
Yes.
Fertilizer use today, we are applying 22 kilos per acre in Africa. They are applying 147, maybe 150 kilos in the north, meaning we have opportunity to grow our fertilizer consumption 7 times, or 700% if you want. That's opportunity for business. We have the largest arable land. That's opportunity for business. We have only 6% of our agriculture is under irrigation. That's another opportunity to migrate our agricultural production to irrigation. In Kenya, for example, we are looking at, in the next couple of months, changing policy so that we can deliver water the same way we have delivered electricity, through public-private partnership. Today, we have a power purchase agreement. I am looking forward in the next couple of weeks to have a water purchase agreement, so that I don't have to put money to build a dam. I can buy water from a private sector investor who has put up 100 million, 200 million shillings to put up a dam. In any case, there is no place on earth where water is free. So, and that will speak largely to irrigation and irrigation infrastructure and irrigation equipment. That's also opportunity for growth. So, looking at the continent from where I sit and from the vantage position of Kenya, I see a much more robust engagement with the private sector in the delivery of what government can do, but government becomes a facilitator. I am also looking at the opportunity to make sure that Africa is competitive. Before the ease of doing indices were abolished, for whatever reason, we had managed to move Kenya from position 136 to position 56. 80 positions down, because we must make our continent competitive. That is how we are going to attract investment. That is how trade is going to flourish.
That brings me to my next question. What does hustling mean? What does it mean, and how do we move from hustling to building established businesses that will provide a backbone for the economy?
This is a concept of how to grow from the bottom. Trickle down has not worked. That's why we have a few people in the economic equation. The majority don't pay taxes, not because they don't want to pay taxes, it's because they have nothing to pay taxes with. The majority don't have jobs, not because they have chosen not to work, but because the economy is such that it locks them out. The concept of bottom up is spreading opportunity, making sure that nobody is left behind. Getting everybody who wakes up early in the morning and sleeps late to have an opportunity to work. And that is why we are saying that the economic model has to change from the trickle down that we've always known for what it is, which never works, and creates a few people and creates opportunity for a few people, and is influenced by connection and is influenced by patronage, and making the whole economic space competitive so that every individual gets an opportunity to be part and parcel of the action. And that is why we are deliberate about access to credit, about access to opportunity, about making sure that education is available to the widest majority as possible. That is the bottom-up economic approach that makes sure that every hustler, in any case, Abraham Lincoln, the, I think, 17th president of the US, said that good things come to those who wait, but only things left by those who hustle.
That is very strong. Okay, so of all the promises that you made to Kenyans on your Kwanzaa manifesto, was it
Kenya
called?
Kwanzaa.
Kenya Kwanzaa manifesto.
Kenya first. That's
Yeah,
what it
Kenya
means.
first, that's what it means, yes. How do you include the constituents? This is something that resonates so powerfully with UNDP and what UNDP does. Do you have some sort of policy management framework or anything where citizens can participate in realizing their own dreams? How do you involve the people?
Public participation is not a sterile provision of the Constitution. It is in our Kenyan Constitution. Public participation is not just a provision. We have to breathe life to it. And if you look at our plan, our first agenda is to make sure that we spread opportunity. How do we spread opportunity? We do not want just to invest in infrastructure. We do not want just to invest in government resources in infrastructure. It must be infrastructure that creates jobs. Because we have close to 5 million young people in Kenya out of school, out of college, without jobs.
And that impacts security, health, and all other things.
Absolutely. So when we talk about housing, it's not the houses we want to build. Of course, it's good to have low-cost houses, but it's the jobs that come with it that is much more significant to our plan. When we talk about access to credit, we have 10 million old Kenyans who today pay as much as 3,000% to access credit. 3,000%.
It's unsustainable. It's not realistic.
Right? While big corporations pay 8%, ordinary people, ordinary hustlers, pay upwards of 500, 1,000. Some people pay 10% per day to access credit. So we are making it deliberate. Access to credit becomes a big component of our plan. In fact, just by making credit available, we can build many enterprises that today are living hand to mouth because they pay more to the Shylocks, they pay more to fintech companies that are taking advantage of them. And these are simple but deliberate interventions that will make sure that we have access to credit. Number three, when we discuss about universal health, it's not so, it's because very many households in Kenya, 1 million people every year sink to poverty because of health related deaths and complications. It is important for us to eliminate that chance of more people sinking into poverty because of health costs by making sure that we have an insurance framework that gives opportunity to everybody to have access to health. And the whole array of what the plan we have is such that we leave no Kenyan behind.
Your Excellency, beyond the domestic arena, what are some of your priorities that you're going to focus on, Pan-African and indeed global? We're here at the UN General Assembly, the global platform to end all global platforms. So what are you looking at beyond Kenya?
Beyond Kenya, we are looking at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, providing...
We have the Secretary General sitting there. I'm going to bring him on in a minute.
Okay. Providing an opportunity for us to build bridges instead of barriers across all our boundaries, making sure that we create out of Africa the largest market for goods and services from other parts of the world, tap into the potential that comes with the youngest population, invest in training, invest in education, invest in health, make sure that we have a viable, vibrant, healthy market and labor force to drive the investment and the opportunities of the future. I am looking at building partnerships with international networks on matters climate change. We will be having a meeting in Egypt.
Yes, at COP. Yes.
COP27 in Egypt. Hopefully we can speak candidly on matters to do with climate change. It's not time to point fingers or blame game. I think it's time for us to be candid about what do we need to do to assist those countries that are suffering the effects of climate change. What do we do about mitigation? What do we do about adaptation? How do we make sure that we can feed those who are running into trouble because of security challenges, conflicts brought about by resource challenges, pasture, food, and the whole of that conundrum.
And what do we do about energy?
And what do we do about energy?
When half our population is in darkness?
In fact, we are discussing about the huge resources that we have in the African continent to leverage on energy that can be generated out of green ammonia, green fertilizer, green energy.
Yes, because I haven't mentioned, of course, Kenya is arguably the leader when it comes to renewable energies in Africa.
Renewable energy, we are actually 90% of all our energy is renewable energy. And we hope in the next 10 years to eliminate, in the next 10 years, hopefully, we hope to eliminate any footprint of fossil fuels as we champion the real present opportunity of green energy around the world. Our geothermal resources can not only give opportunity for us to have green energy, we can also do fertilizer, and we can actually sell energy to the rest of the world. We have had a meeting this afternoon with investors who are willing to partner with us in that particular endeavor. So that's the space we are looking at. And of course, we are looking at what we can do about the voice of the voiceless. We are going to have a conversation, a candid conversation about the Security Council, about the multilateral system. Is it working? Is everybody having a voice? Is it solving solutions? There is going to be a conversation about the balance of power so that every voice can count.
Now, we were talking about energy. I know it's been a long day, and you were in London for the funeral of the Queen Elizabeth, but I hope you have a little bit more energy for us, because I want to extend this conversation slightly. In the beginning, you talked about trade, you talked about finance. So I want to bring 3 people to join us here. I'll vacate my seat and wander around the room. Okay. 1 on development, 1 on trade, and 1 on finance, and no ordinary people either. I'm going to invite to the stage first Ahuna Eziakonwa. I'll give them a round of applause as they come. The director for the UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa on development. So you can take my seat there. And then on trade, who else? But His Excellency Wamkele Meni, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Perhaps you can take that seat over there. And I told you about the African Influencers for Development. I'm going to actually, they have to work when they're in the African Influencers for Development. So, right here I have my brother Samaila Zubairu, the President of the Africa Finance Corporation, on finance and investments. So this is a perfect trio now. Okay, so let's begin. We don't have a lot of time, so let's begin. Perhaps, Ahuna, you are the co-host together with the African Influencers for Development, UNDP's, which you, of course, were instrumental in creating. Let me begin with you. Perhaps I'm not going to ask you a question. I'm just going to ask you to reflect on what you heard from His Excellency and what you heard from Achim Steiner, and perhaps tell us what thoughts were running through your mind. What do you want to kind of reflect on or respond to?
Thank you, Mark. Let me really say, Mr. President, we're very happy to have you here, and of course, our First Lady. Really wonderful to have a chat earlier with you and discover your own passion for humanity. And of course, all our distinguished guests in the room. You know, the UNDP administrator just recently launched the Human Development Report, UNDP's flagship report, which described the current world we live in as a world of worry. A world that is characterized by uncertainty, fear, insecurity, an unsettled world. But the core message of that report is that we need to turn all this heightened insecurity and instability into opportunity. We need to turn the anxiety that has gripped the world today into action. And to do so through 3 I's. Investment. Investment in building the capabilities that the world will need today. Insurance. Insurance to protect those that will be unavoidably affected by the uncertainty of our world. And innovation. Innovation in technology, in economy, in culture, that would help build the capabilities that don't as yet exist. And to really translate that into Africa, we say that this is what Africa Beyond Aid is all about. And Mr. President, I think, has coined it, or sort of characterized it in the way that we think about it in UNDP, in his hustler agenda. That it is really about seeking to create a new social contract between governments and their people. And why is Beyond Aid as a concept important? Because aid in itself, the way it has been, the architecture and the way it's carried on in Africa, has been a bit of a threat to that social contract. That trust that needs to be created between the people and society has been not so much reinforced by aid. So Africa Beyond Aid isn't about Africa without aid. It's about the quality of aid that helps to build that social contract that the President has been talking about. It's about silencing the noise that the aid framework generates in Africa, absorbing the energy of the leaders and the systems, despite being only a fraction of what actually developed countries. You know, I've been resident coordinator in 3 countries in Africa, and I was always amazed at how much time, your time, the time of the ministers, we suck up in our international development system that don't actually allow the leaders to think for themselves and create a policy space where they are understanding what they need to move forward. That noise needs to be silenced. And in its favor, let's shift the relationship between lenders and borrowers to a relationship between the government and the people and build that trust. And I think finally is this concept of quality and quantity. In Africa, aid for us has become about the small dimensions. You know, we frame aid in Africa in the context of small medium enterprises, micro, small, medium enterprises, microcredit, microfinance. Everything is small in our minds in the aid framework when we think about Africa. And Beyond Aid is saying we need to move away from this and dream big. We need to go bigger, better,
Dream big.
smarter. This is what Beyond Africa is seeking. Beyond Aid is seeking for Africa.
Thank you, Ahuna Eziakonwa, for opening up there. Thank you very much. You got 2 rounds of applause. You're the first person to get 2 except for His Excellency. So I must recognize, the protocol dictates that I recognize Dr. Nardos Bekele Thomas, the CEO of Auda NEPAD, is right here. And she has the best, I think that's the best jacket in the room, actually, Your Excellency. Very, very wonderful, beautifully dressed. Okay, so, you know, I've had the good fortune of working closely with many of the instrumental organizations that pushed that boulder up that hill, the AFCFTA, where it was now. In fact, we used to call it CFTA. Yeah, before. That's how old I am now. I remember the original. Afrexim Bank, the African Union, and now the AFCFTA Secretariat. Now, for all you people who are passionate about investing and partnering in Africa, you cannot leave out the AFCFTA Secretariat. It is in Ghana, and I strongly recommend you, they're very welcome, aren't they, Your Excellency, to come and visit and see how you can use the AFCFTA as a platform. We are talking about Africa Beyond Aid, a win for all. That's not possible without the biggest free trade area in the world at the moment. How does the AFCFTA fit into this theme?
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and I want to thank UNDP. I think the administrator has just stepped out to thank UNDP for being a strong partner for development on the continent. I want to also take this opportunity to congratulate you, Your Excellency, on your election. And if I may say this, we have had peaceful and democratic elections in Angola and in Kenya, and I know we will have peaceful and democratic elections in Nigeria early next year. And this is a very important point to register, because we have seen this year people waking up in a military barracks, deciding that they want to be president without being elected by the people. And so what Kenya, Angola, and Nigeria will demonstrate is that that is not the Africa we want. And so I'm extremely proud, Your Excellency, that you were elected in a free and democratic election. The AFCFTA, as we all know, is a significant opportunity for trade and investment. The World Bank projected that by the year 2035, where we implement the AFCFTA effectively, we as Africans have the opportunity to lift almost 100 million people out of poverty, 70 million people out of abject poverty, 30 million people out of moderate poverty, as well as contribute close to $450 billion to Africa's combined GDP, consumer spending, and business spending. But most importantly, the projection that encourages me is that the most immediate beneficiaries will be small, medium enterprises that are led by women. That is why the partnership from a development perspective is so important with UNDP. By the year 2035, our continent can be close to an $8 trillion economy, combined GDP. That's the projection. We are not going to reach that very, very encouraging projection if our market continues to be fragmented. Egypt won't be able to succeed alone. Kenya, South Africa, nobody will be able to be globally competitive as a single country on the African continent. All of us combined, all 55 of us contribute less than 3% to global GDP. We contribute about 2.1% to global trade and output. Singapore contributes close to 6% to global trade and output. That tells us that there's a deficit in terms of industrial development and investment in productive sectors. So what we are unlocking in the AFCFTA is an opportunity for investors to invest, as His Excellency said, in a fast-growing market. Before the onset of the pandemic, as we all know, of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 6 were in Africa. The average growth rate, according to the AFDB, was at about 3.5%, which should indicate to any investor that certainly there is potential. But what has been constraining us is a fragmentation of our markets. You go and you invest in East Africa, the rules are different to West Africa. The rules are different to Southern Africa. So the value proposition we advance is that we present a market, a consolidated market of 1.3 billion people, and you can trade and invest based on a single set of rules. That did not happen before. Let me give you an example. If you are an investor of manufacturing automobiles and you want to spread value chains across the African continent, before the AFCFTA, the rules of origin that applied, that is to say the local content, that applied in North Africa was different to Southern Africa, different to East Africa, different to West Africa. So how do you invest in that environment where the regulations, depending on where you are investing on the region, are so different? And the effect, of course, is that they constrain investment. The second example I would make, which is also an illustration of the value proposition for investment. Dr. Mwangi and I had a conversation the other day in Arusha about the automobile sector. The president reminded us we're 17% of the global population. We produce less than 1 million vehicles per year, the whole continent. Similarly, and that is largely between Kenya, South Africa, Morocco. India produces 5 million vehicles, 5 million units of vehicles per year, and they import only the very necessary components. That means that they are creating jobs in India, they are creating investment opportunities in India, and they are creating innovation and spurring on innovation in India. So we have a vast opportunity not only in manufacturing the vehicle itself, but the components, because we want the benefits to spread beyond South Africa, beyond Morocco, to other countries. The processing of leather in Liberia, the processing of copper in Zambia, to establish a truly continental value chain where investors will be able to invest and see their returns. I'm very happy to report to you that already Afreximbank has signaled an initial amount of over $1 billion to help countries that want to invest in the auto sector. Equity Bank has set aside about $7 billion for productive sector investment. The third example that I would mention, which again should be, and this is where I will end, Mark, I know we have time constraints. In 2019, before the pandemic, our continent imported $16 billion in 2019, $16 billion worth of pharmaceutical products. The components that are required, if we can call them components, for making these pharmaceutical products are on the continent. The agricultural products are here on the continent. But the processing is done elsewhere. The value addition is done elsewhere. The job creation goes elsewhere. The innovation goes elsewhere. And so with these examples that I mentioned, that is where our investors, development finance institutions, private equity, African, can look at primary sectors for investment. And that's the value proposition for the AFCFTA. We're presenting this market of 1.3 billion people.
Your Excellency, you just gave me a perfect segue. I love it from investment. So we went from development, Your Excellency. We went to trade. Let's go to investment, finance. Well, right here we have President of AFC, African Finance Corporation, Mr. Samaila Zubairu. They're based in Lagos, but they're a Pan-African DFI, doing amazing works and the leading institution on investing in infrastructure solutions across the continent. You've been listening patiently to this. We're talking about Africa Beyond Aid, a win for all. One of the things that I like that I've heard from you recently, this was in London. We were at the Invest Africa event just a few months ago, and you made a speech there. And you said we need to recalibrate our thinking from looking at the world helping to solve Africa's problems, to unleashing Africa's potential as a solutions provider for the world. Switch completely. I thought that was quite powerful. So in responding to everything you've heard, because at the end of the day, AFCFTA, as you say, is not possible without the right investment. Yeah, please include in your answer what you mean by that. Samaila.
Thank you very much. I would like to join my colleagues in congratulating Mr. President on your well-earned victory, and to thank our colleagues and partners at the UNDP for convening this event, and especially to Ahunna for working with her colleagues to create the African Influencers for Development. I think that's a fantastic initiative that will allow us to continue to talk about how we can develop our continent. So to your questions, maybe a little bit about AFC so that you can understand what I'm saying. So the Africa Finance Corporation is one of those initiatives emanating from NEPAD. There was this group of African elders thinking about Africa, its challenges and its opportunities, and how best to provide solutions. So we were created to help address Africa's infrastructure gap. The idea being you need infrastructure to enable industrialization. You need infrastructure to have that operating environment that will be easy and that will also reduce risk of operating on the continent. We all know that everything in Africa costs so much more and takes so much longer. So for example, if you wanted to export out of Central African Republic, it might take you 7 weeks, to do that. It might take you, cost you probably about $40,000, to be able to do that, compared to maybe out of Alexandria in Egypt, where it might be just about a week and maybe about just $1,500. So these are the challenges that we face as a continent. The idea behind AFC is have this Africa-focused institution that would work to unlock African opportunities by developing to de-risk those opportunities. So we build partnerships with governments, with sponsors, and everyone that wants to do business in Africa. By reducing the risk, we would move from idea to a bankable project. So that's really what we do. And we've done that successfully over the last 15 years. We have deployed over $10 billion across the energy space, across transport and logistics, heavy industries, telecoms, technology, as well as natural resources. We have invested across 38 African countries, as I mentioned. And we have always done this, being the first. So we were the first to build a power plant in Ghana, an independent power plant in Ghana. We're the first to build the wind farm in Cape Verde. We're the first to build the IPP in a wind farm again in Djibouti. We're currently the largest owner of renewable power in Africa as we speak today. So I think the key thing I want us to focus on going forward with everything that has been said is let's look at the nature of African economies. African economies have refused or have not been able to structurally transform. Why is that the case? Because we have always exported raw materials and we continue to export raw materials. Once we export raw materials, we're exporting the jobs that will be captured through value addition. So our value capture remains very low. That's why we have the challenge we have of unemployment, devaluation, and all the things that come with it. So anytime we have commodity super cycles like we're going through now, African countries will do well because of the prices of the commodities. But anytime there's volatility, we go into debt, we have currency depreciation, and we have all kinds of challenges. The way to change that is for us to focus on value capture. So if you look at, let's say, cocoa, for example, 70% of the world's cocoa is in Africa, but there's no value capture. We're exporting cocoa beans. You know, if you look at cashew, something as basic as cashew, about 50% grows in Africa. There's also no value capture. You know, if you look at the cocoa industry, cocoa is about $130 billion in terms of value chain. Cashew is over $10 billion in terms of value chain. Textiles and garmenting is over $1 trillion in terms of value chain. But if you stay in the primary end, you will not capture value. And for us to have the goods that we will trade in the continental free trade area, we have to do value capture on the continent. It cannot be that we'll be doing assembly plants or packaging plants in Africa from the rest of the world for trade within the continental free trade area. That cannot be the idea. So we must focus on how do we build the industry. And we do that simply by taking advantage of the intersection of opportunities that has come upon us. So today we have climate change, we have energy transition, we have the food crisis, all presenting opportunities for Africa. So we must seize the moment. You know, now is the time to seize the moment. Now is the time to focus on how can we create value. So if we look at, I mean, I was having a conversation earlier today about battery minerals, you know, the fact that most of them are in Africa, and we need to ensure that that happens. Especially because if you look at the continental free trade area, we're going to need 2 million trucks to be able to move goods. It cannot be that we want to use diesel trucks for that mobility. It has to be that we're looking at electric trucks or trucks that use CNG, compressed natural gas, for mobility. And all of these resources are in Africa, so we have to find the ways of harnessing these resources. So again, what is important is we can move from cotton to garments. We have built an industrial zone in Gabon that moved from timber to plywood, sawwood, veneer, and furniture, increasing export by over 400%. We can do that in several other areas. We have a pilot now in Benin Republic, whereby we're trying to move from garments to t-shirts. There, if you export just garments, we can export probably $2 billion worth of of cotton. But if we transform to garments, it's about $38 billion. You see the increase. Also, if we continue to mine cobalt, nickel, and lithium, we can have about $11–12 billion of value from that. But if we move to battery precursors, we can have over $270 billion. Imagine the step change. And all of these things are possible with the right policy and with the right framework. The UNDP administrator talked about a firm called Milliman. I think that is Milliman or Mac? Okay. So we'll be interested to know more about a firm like that assesses Africa's risk, assesses risk generally, because one of the key challenges we have is the risk perception of Africa. It will be good to work with UNDP and others to see how we can better price African risk, especially because a good way for us to move from aid to investment and trade is through insurance. If we can have the right insurance products that would provide first loss and also provide PRI and credit insurance, we would see a lot more capital deployed on the continent. We also need to look at how we can build the corridors for transport and logistics. With all the disruptions that are happening in supply chains across the globe, Africa is a good candidate for nearshoring because of proximity to America, to Europe, to Asia, and the stock of goods that can be traded within the continent itself. These are all opportunities that I think that we should pursue. So again, it's how can we have more value capture in Africa? How can we build the regional infrastructure that will facilitate trade across the continent? How can we financially innovate in a way that we can attract the funds that are required for the energy transition? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, I know that you have to go in a few minutes, and I'm going to allow you to have the final word, but I'm going to take one, if you allow me, very quick response from the floor. And I'm going to go to the Chief Executive Officer of FinDev Canada, Laurie Kerr. Give her a round of applause, please. I just want to know, if you could stand up, please, so we can see you. I just want to know your reaction to all this. This must be very interesting for you. Perhaps maybe tell people what FinDev Canada does, and then maybe give us just your thoughts in 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Oh, now that's tough. That's absolutely tough. So, Your Excellency, congratulations, and honorable ladies and gentlemen, it is such a pleasure to be here tonight. As was introduced, I'm Laurie Kerr, the CEO of FinDev Canada. I've been incredibly inspired by the messages that I've heard tonight. I've been with FinDev Canada for only 1 year. We were established in 2018, and I'm very proud to say that in just a few short years, 50% of our portfolio is in Africa or reaches in Africa. We have supported, in fact, our very first investment was MCOPA. We've also supported local banks and local funds, including EcoBank and Trade Development Bank. We've also supported forestry funds, Myro operating in Ghana and Sierra Leone. I'm very inspired by the words that I've heard tonight. I think as the youngest development financial institution, the sort of the new kid on the block, I feel that we can also harness the opportunity that we have in the markets that we serve, harness the youth, harness the energy that we have in the African continent. And what we're looking for in FinDev Canada is to partner, have long-term partnerships with local entrepreneurs, with local banks. What we're very excited about is opportunities in sustainable infrastructure. We're very excited about agriculture and forestry, as has been outlined. And we're very excited, of course, to continue to support local intermediaries through funds and through local banks. I think I'm inspired by the words that I've heard tonight. Again, as a young development finance institution, we'd love to grow in the continent, grow more in the continent, and thank you very much for sharing your very inspiring words this evening.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, I'm going to let you have the final word in a moment, but I must be remiss of me. It wasn't easy to put this thing together. We had a lot of support, and I want to recognize my dear friend Uzo Iwela from the Africa Center. Where are you? Uzo, very strategic to make this happen. Uzo, and if you haven't been to the Africa Center, get in touch. It is a cultural center for New York and indeed the United States of America, the Africa Center. Dr. Uzo Iwela there. Your Excellency, you heard development, you heard trade, and you heard finance and investment. Everything that you talked about on one stage, I gave to you tonight. So it remains for you to have the final reflections and the final words. But I will say this before you do. You talked about silos. We need to break silos. We need to work together better. The opportunity is only there if we go together. And you need to be the great unifier. That's part of your job. So as you close with your thoughts, I just want you to talk about, come full circle to the concept of partnerships, the concept of breaking down barriers, breaking down silos, so that we can work together and get the Africa we want. Your Excellency, the final word is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. This good gentleman from AFTC, Africa Continental Free Trade Area, couldn't have been more right. Kenya, by the way, was the second country. We are actually the first to ratify the AFTA treaty because we believe in it, because we believe it's the avenue to remove the barriers. It is the avenue to remove the roadblocks. It is the opportunity to create bridges and be able to have a continent that can trade with itself. And therefore, we are the greatest champions of getting all the barriers off and having Africa as one united market destination. I am also very clear about what is said, value capture. We have to stop selling primary goods. I think that's our greatest undoing. Value addition, agro-processing must be the order of the day. I have committed in Kenya. Today, we export our tea 95% unprocessed. But I have committed that in the next 5 years, 50% of Kenyan tea will not leave Kenya unless value is added. And that is where policy, investment, and job creation meet. And the most unfortunate thing is that most of the value that is added is not significant. You know, when people talk about value addition, it's not about big machines, it's very simple things that can be done. So I will encourage our friends at Africa Continental Free Trade Area, as I do fellow leaders in our continent, that this must be an imperative of our time to make sure that Africa trades with itself, and number two, value addition becomes the norm, not the exception.
Your Excellency, I said it at the beginning that he's probably the most popular person at UNGA, and he could have been anywhere tonight, but he's here with you. So I want you to please stand up, Your Excellency, and I want all of you to stand up. Where's my photographer? I hope he's doing his job. Is the invisible photographer, where are you? Yes, come on. And I want your applause to be measured by how much you enjoyed that interaction. Let's listen to the sound of that applause for His Excellency President William Ruto of Kenya and the SG of the AFCFTA, Ahuna, and thank you very much, Samaila Zubairu. I'm actually going to, before we take pictures, I want to take pictures with my dear governors here, both of you. If you can join us on the stage. Can I take one last photo? Come and join us. Come on, the governor of Ekiti State. And Akim Steiner, please, if you could join us, please. Akim, can we take a photo? If we take a photo with you as well. This is a family photo to end family photos. Look at that, wonderful. And I will say, Your Excellency, you're not going on this road alone. We are all there with you. We are all there with you. Another round of applause, please. Now, please, if you could go back to your seats as His Excellency, take your seats as His Excellency has to vacate the building. He's had a very long day. The discussion continues. We're going to have dinner now, so please do not leave. We're going to have dinner and discussion. I've called it food for thought. I will give you food and you give me thought. It's a good contract. Okay, so the dinner is now served. If you can please take your seats whilst we continue. There is still a little more of the program to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to go for a tour de table. I like saying that word, tour de table. We're going to go around the various tables and get some reflections from the tables. I'm going to go around and pick a few people, and indeed if you wish to speak and introduce yourself, we're going to talk about the issue of trade, finance, and Africa. So without much ado, I think I'm going to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I appeal to you to please.
It's clean. No, just use this one. This is fine.
I appeal to you to please give me your attention, please. I know that there's a lot of networking and dialogue going on. If I could ask you all to please take a seat. SG Wamkele Mene, please, if I know that I don't want you to escape, so I'm going to ask you to take a seat again. So ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. Hiding in the corner over here, ladies and gentlemen, hiding over the corner is a man with a plan. A man with a plan. An individual who is a powerhouse in Africa, someone who is passionate and has had many decades at the top of the private sector. He's a development champion. He is the founder of Equity Group. He is Dr. James Mwangi. I want you to give, I'm going to wake you up by giving you a round of applause, please, for Dr. James Mwangi. Now, if I could ask you to, maybe I could ask you to stand, please. Now, Dr. Mwangi, we were on stage together, weren't we? We were on stage together just about, how long was it? It was maybe like yesterday or day before yesterday at Gabi, at the Global African Business Initiative. What we talked about there was a grand plan called the Recovery and Resilience Plan that you had. This is a passion of yours. I want to give you an opportunity, based on what we're talking about, Africa Beyond Aid, a win for all, maybe perhaps how that ties in with some of the objectives of what you see to be the priorities as outlined in your plan. I think this microphone works. You can try this.
Thank you very much. Broadly what we did was to listen to the voice of Africa. And if you listen to the speakers who spoke this evening, it was the same thing being said in different words. And essentially, we felt that the biggest challenge Africa has always had was lacking a plan of its own. So we did put that plan into on paper and said, this is the African collaborative plan for recovery and resilience. And essentially, it has 6 components. And the first one is really focus on what Africa is endowed with. Focus on agriculture and focus on natural resources. Seek productivity gains, because our productivity is quite low relative to global standards. So seek that gain and then turn that as our input for manufacturing. And that becomes the basis for our manufacturing sector. And then relate with others through trade and investment, not aid. Let's really trade and let's encourage investments in Africa. But essentially, the Hasura narrative seems to be gaining ground. Let's also formalize our small and medium enterprises. Let's fund them and let them populate the value chains of our corporations and the formal sector, so that the African economy becomes integrated. And lastly, let's do with technology. Let's leapfrog so that the gains in terms of future-proofing, the gains in terms of economies of scale using technology, but more importantly, to appeal to our young people and ensure that education is relevant for the transformation of the African continent, without losing sight that the way we do it, we shouldn't make the environment any worse. So clean energy, renewable energy, be the energy for use. And I deeply appreciate what the President of Kenya has said. Kenya should be 100% clean energy by 2030.
Thank you very much, Dr. James Mwangi of Equity Group, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to go all the way over here across. This is what keeps me fit. And I'm going to go over to one of our African influencers for development. I'm going to go over to Samba Bachili, one of our African influencers for development, and also, might I say, one of the sponsors for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Samba, maybe we could come this way, maybe to the front. Can you join me? I want to ask you, Samba, we've often talked about this. One of the challenges we have for raising finance in Africa, one of the challenges we have is perception. Perception premium, they call it sometimes, right? This is something we have to address, and we have to address this based not on a silo, but actually address it as a unit. Give us some ideas on how we can do that. Maybe turn this way. I think the camera is over. Where's the camera? Aha, there. Okay. Yes.
Perception, that's a good word, because if you take the continent, our biggest challenge, we're talking about investment every day, the biggest challenge of investment in Africa is perception. The perception of risk. And this perception is among first African. Perception of African about Africa. That I think first we need to overcome before even talking about outsider about investment or tourism. I remember 2 months ago with this lady from ABC, there was a meeting in Zambia about tourism and investment. So I think I was the last person who speak at that meeting. And people was talking about the challenge of tourism, the cost of airfare, the tax, the heavy tax on airport tax, the lack of hotel room, so on and so on. So when I spoke, I said, okay, all that you say is a reality, but the biggest challenge we have in Africa is the perception of us African about Africa. When you think about the tourism industry, so tourism industry in Africa is a 47 billion industry. It's 88 million people, 88 million tourists. But if you take the population of Africa, we are 1.3 billion African. So imagine if we change that perception, if we have only 10% of African population decide to do tourism, intra-African tourism, this is, we double the number of tourists. If we double the number of tourists, the airfare will go down. That's one thing. The tax will go down. And also, they will create a market. Once we create a market, investment will come. There's no magic. People will put money when there is a return on investment. So if we create the critical mass, so investment will flow. Investment first of African, because I think that's what we should look into for, because if you take most of the businesses, not everybody investing cross Africa, because they don't know. But there's so much money in Africa. If we first decide to invest primarily in Africa, there's a room to go. I was amazed when I was talking to a real estate company in Dubai. I found out that more than 27,000 Nigerians invest average $300,000 into apartment and hotel room in Dubai, where it's 40 degrees. You know how hot is Dubai? And you have so many nice places in Africa. And
I want to apologize on behalf of 200 million Nigerians, but please go on.
So, perception, I think, is the first thing that block investment and tourism in Africa.
So how do we change it?
So how do we change it? I think we need to come up with an idea that I come up with that in that meeting, is to a program that I call Visa. Visa, you know, this will be something that we can come up, and we are discussing with UNDP. It's Visit Africa, because we have Visit Rwanda, Visit Kenya, where they spend millions and millions. And we could do a program that in every African country will invest $1 million by the private sector, and I'm willing to put the first $1 million.
Yes, that's it.
So into 20 countries, and have thousands of companies, at least each one put $1,000. So that will be 55 million for each African country by the private sector. And we can ask also the public sector, the government, to put $1 million. So that is $110 million. So we can use that money into media, social media, into films, because we are not doing much. And we always talking about investment. Every African country have a investment agency. But investing in Africa, the perception is still the problem that we don't have enough investment. So if we change that perception, it could come from influencer, it could come from film, because if you take today, we have we have Nollywood. We need to have film that, or series that go across Africa, that can change that perception from African people first. Because we're talking about 1.3 billion African. If we change that perception, we'll start now traveling in Africa for our tourism. We'll go to Africa for our health, for our education, for our shopping. And this is the only way CFTA could be a reality. So it's just up to us to do it. And I think together we can achieve it if we change that perception of African about Africa. The rest of the world will follow.
Samba Bachili, thank you very much, founder of ADS, an African influencer for development. Where am I going to go to next? Let me see, Zem, aha. Okay, just give us a little, introduce yourself and what you do, and then let's keep this like short, I think, because I want to bring in a lot of people. Go ahead.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. My name is Zemedine Negatu. I run a US-based private equity firm that invests primarily in Africa. I just have a very brief comment. We've been discussing about the opportunities in Africa for the last, 15 to 20 years. We always ask, why is not more capital coming into Africa? While I completely agree that there's the opportunities in Africa, and we deploy hundreds of millions of dollars every year into Africa, as Africans, we also have to ask, what is the reason? What is it that we need to do, especially here in the United States? Americans are extremely risk-averse when it comes to investing in Africa. So while all the things that we said we agree, we need to also assess from an African perspective why more capital is not coming. I agree with the perception thing, but the reality is in the last 10, 12, 13 years, not much has changed. We still account for less than 5% of global FDI coming into Africa. So it's incumbent on us to try to address the reason. How? One is governance, for sure. I mean, across the board, across Africa, governance, while there's variations, is still an issue, certainly from an American perspective, okay? The rule of law, security, all these elements that you can't bypass, no matter how much due diligence, no matter how much opportunity. So if we address the issue of governance, for example, it will take away a lot of the concerns. Again, I'm not talking about Europeans or others, but strictly, and we operate out of here, even though we raise capital globally, there is definitely the risk. Second, from an American perspective, as was said here earlier, African countries as standalones are not attractive. They're too small. So as the head of the AFCFTA said, we need to promote and create the awareness that we're going into an integrated market. For the United States, Africa accounts for less than 2% of its total trade. So if they go by those kinds of numbers and they dismiss Africa by and large, I know there are some US government officials in here, they'll be very polite and not say it in so many words, but for the US, Africa as a whole is small, and then when you start fragmenting it, where, for example, the manufacturing business, labor-intensive manufacturing, if we go across Africa as an integrated, if we presented opportunities as integrated regional opportunities, we tend to put more manufacturing facilities. Energy, for example, if we invest them as regional projects, there'll be a lot more capital. If every country wants to build a $5 billion dam or some other, it won't happen. So the integration component as being promoted.
Yeah, the African Continental Free Trade
that
Area.
Needs to be, the awareness needs to be created. So all I'm saying is, as Africans also, we need to take the ownership, the responsibility to understand why more money, because money goes where there's a return. And there is return in Africa, but it's not being connected. So I just wanted to emphasize this as people who both do investment as investment bankers, but also as private equity that put millions of dollars in Africa.
Thank you, Zem. Thank you. Thank you, Zem. Okay, I'm going to open the floor now to see who would like to speak. Would anybody like to speak? Okay. Lee Ward. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to a very interesting fellow, an American, but also an African as well now, I suppose. Lee is doing some very interesting investments and works, and you now, in fact, live in Tanzania, don't you? So tell us a little bit about your story, and maybe, I'm going to give you this microphone here. There you go. There's the microphone. Tell us, introduce yourself, and maybe perhaps based on what you're doing, give us a few reflections on what you've heard today.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Lloyd Ward, and I am an industrialist that focuses on economic development. I've been blessed to have a career where I was the first African American CEO of a Fortune 500 company in the USA. Thank you. I was on the board of JP Morgan Chase. Do you know this bank? On the board of General Motors. I and another African American, we raised $300 million on Wall Street in what's called a SPAC, a Special Purpose Acquisition Company. We raised that money on our name. If we can raise that money on our name, what can we do in Africa? You see, Africa is the most resource-abundant land on earth, and yet it contributes less than 3% of the global economy. If we took the global economy and represented it as $1 US, please listen to me. If we represent the global economy as $1 US, the United States would be 26 cents. China would be 20 cents. You should listen.
Can I ask people to listen at the back there? People that are talking, please, please just pause your conversation for a second. That's you over there. Yes, you, I'm looking at you, and you, and you. Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. If we represent the global economy as $1 US, the United States would represent 26 cents. China, 20 cents. Japan, 5 cents. Germany, 4 cents. India, 3.6 cents. UK, 3.4 cents. France, 2.9 cents. All of the African countries, 54 countries, would represent 2.8 cents. I want you to reflect on that. That France has a GDP greater than the GDP of all the countries in Africa. You see, that's a great injustice. You say, what do we do about this? I'm an American industrialist, but I'm African, and I've gone back home. I'm taking all of my knowledge, all of my resources, and I've gone back to Africa. People ask me, what are the keys to Africa unlocking its economic potential? And here they are. First, Africa, we have to define ourselves as an economic powerhouse. You see, that's a different way of thinking about things. We're an economic powerhouse. What does that mean? That means we need to be one of the top 3 GDPs in the world. If I don't get more claps than that, you don't understand what I'm saying. The top 3 GDPs in the world, that means 20 cents of the dollar from 2 cents on the dollar in the global economy. That's the first thing. We've got to redefine ourselves. The second is we have to leapfrog. We cannot increment our way there. The world is moving too fast. I will guarantee you this. The world is moving too fast to increment our way there. We have to leapfrog. Third thing, very important, we have to resist China. China is colonizing Africa with its dollars, not with cannons and not with guns, but with their dollars. They're colonizing today. And when they get a foothold in, they create debt that's burdensome, and they extract the vast riches of Africa for their own benefit. I know. I worked and saw the last 30 years the economic development of China. Where 30 years ago, China was less developed than Africa is today. And China has focused on industrialization for the world, and they are an economic powerhouse in the world. Number 2 GDP in the world. Those are the 3 overarching things that we need to pay attention to. And there are 3 pillars. Here's what we need to do economically. First, we have to pay attention to, know and serve our markets. I'm going to tell you what that means in just a minute. Know and serve our markets. Second, we have to follow the money. And third, we have to act in unity. So what does that mean? I spent 3 years on the ground in Tanzania, and I want to show you, has anybody seen $1 trillion? Anybody know what $1 trillion is? What is $1 trillion? $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. $1 trillion is 1,000,000 million. So what does $1 trillion look like economically? Do we know? Do you know? I want to show you $1 trillion. I have $1 trillion in my pocket.
Must be heavy.
It's not heavy. Here's what it is. And please understand what I'm going to show you, because until we start to see what we have differently, we will not realize our economic potential. Here's $1 trillion. This is a raw cashew nut. Inside has a kernel. You crack open the shell, and it's the kernel, the cashew nut kernel, that we consume. In Africa, we produce 60% of the world's kernel, cashew nuts. 60%. We sell them at $1 per kilo on average. In the global market, as an industrialist, as a market maker, what I did at Frito-Lay, what I would assign to a middle manager in Frito-Lay, would be to take this and value-add process it, and take it to a consumer packaged goods and sell it directly into the global market. And guess how much this would be worth? This $1 RCN would be worth $40. $40. Now, I don't know if you understand scale, but Tanzania harvests 250,000 metric tons a year. There's 1,000 kilos in a metric ton. And you can go from $1 to $40. You try to do that on your mobile device, it will break it. It will show you exponential numbers. It'll have so many zeros. Today, by monetizing Tanzania's cashew nut crop, $250 million are realized by selling it at the lowest economic value in the industrial marketplace as a commodity. When we value add process it, that same harvest is worth $3.2 billion. There's $3 billion every year, and all the jobs that go along with industrialization that go when those RCNs are exported to Vietnam and India. Vietnam now processes and provides to the world over 75% of all the cashew nuts in the world, and yet 60% are harvested in Africa. You see, this is a dawn of a new day and a new way. It is time for what I call kingdom time. I will conclude my remarks with this comment. After we raised $300 million on Wall Street, we became, my partner and I, kind of rock stars in the world. They wanted to know, how did 2 black guys go to Wall Street and raise $300 million on our name alone? So we were invited around the world to speak. I was invited to one African country, Ghana. And I went. It was a black tie event. And a wonderful evening. Following my remarks, they asked me if I wanted to go out and look at the Atlantic Ocean on a star-filled night. I said, I certainly do. They took me on a boardwalk that was distant from the water's edge. The meeting was over and I wanted to get closer. I took off my shoes, my socks, and I rolled up my pants legs. And I walked that sandy beach to the water's edge. And I stood there and I was in the presence of God's magnificence as I looked at that vast ocean on a star-filled night, and the water seemed uncharacteristically still. You know, the ocean always has movement, waves, and it was uncharacteristically still. And as I was standing at that water's edge, absorbing the magnificence of God in my presence, he struck me to my knees. And those that were with me said, "Mr. Ward, Mr. Ward, Mr. Ward, Mr. Ward." And their voices faded in the distance as God pulled me into the spiritual world. And he let me see souls, millions of souls of our ancestors that were bound together and stacked in the bows of slave ships like sardines to traverse that vast ocean, many of them not making it. And those that did, there was no way back. And as my soul cried for my ancestors at that water's edge, God said these words to me: "These souls are mine, my son." And he let me come back to earth. I did not know that was God preparing me for my return to Africa, to my motherland, and that he gave me these incredible experiences. And people say that were my crowning achievements, and I say not. Those were preparations for this moment in time. I am here in service of Africa. I'm in here to work with the African Union. I'm here to work with the heads of state that would want to work with us. I'm willing to work with the farmers, the in-country processors, the politicians. I'm willing to connect Africa with America in direct commerce. No traders, brokers, dealers, speculators. Direct commerce from the rich and fertile soils of Africa to the largest consumer market in the world, USA, and then beyond to the world at large. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that. Wow. Okay, so you were talking about being a force. So that leads me very nicely to Claire Akamanzi. He said force of nature. So that's you, Claire. If I could ask you to stand. Claire is the, make sure I get this right, CEO, is that the title, of the Rwanda Development Board. In fact, you just completed AGRA in Kigali. That went, the agricultural forum, which of course with the food crisis going on now is massively important. I just want your reflections. I know you, and I know the great work that President Kagame does, and you're appointed by President Kagame, and I know how passionate both he and you are as Pan-Africans to see us go beyond aid in a win for all. So from your perspective, and your role and the multiplicity of the things that you're responsible for, I just want to get your take on what you've heard tonight and maybe some of the solutions or the directions you think we should go in.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think so many good ideas have been said today, and I think many good ideas have also been said the whole week. So I don't really know what to add at this time, especially after dinner and everybody's tired. But I think that the only thing I would say is I wish we could do the things that we talk about. I think that we talk so much. We know what needs to be done. We know integration is important. We know manufacturing, agro-processing is important. We know all these things. But we don't do as much as we say. So if there's only one thing I would say tonight is, can we do the things that we say? And can we do them quickly with a sense of urgency? Can we do them with everybody included? And I think our humble experience as a country in Rwanda, small country, small population, very few resources, I think the only thing that has really helped us is a leadership that actually gets things done. So let's do things. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire Akamanzi. I'm going to go over now to my dear friend. I think he's trying to leave because it's the end of, when he puts on his hat, you know that he's actually exiting the building. Now, this gentleman is Sanjeev Gupta. He is the executive director of the Africa Finance Corporation. You heard the president speak before, and he knows I'm something of a fan about how he articulates all this stuff. In fact, he was the guy that, and I've borrowed many of his phrases, but the one I often borrow, and I don't attribute to you, I just steal it, is that when we talk, let me say, how do you say it? Net zero? Africa is already at net zero. That was my favorite one of yours. I just want you, before you leave, just to give us a few reflections, please.
Okay, you caught me. So the abiding lesson is that if the master of ceremonies has the same hairstyle as you, then you better be careful. So I've been caught because I was planning to leave. But Mark, the only thing I'll say is that, there is this ancient saying that those who don't read history are condemned to repeat it, right? And today, in so many ways, everything everybody said was a history lesson. It's a lesson for us on the African continent on what we must not repeat ourselves doing. So one is the unity factor, which came up a lot of times. The other is this whole mineral extraction and the value-added thing. Third was the battery mineral, because I think to me, this battery mineral and its role in the renewable industry and the world's search for net zero represents probably the first opportunity in 200 years for Africa to actually stand on its feet, leverage on its strengths, and bargain like hell, because the world needs those minerals. So to me, the abiding lesson, as I said, apart from the fact that avoid a person with the same hairstyle, is that we must not repeat the mistakes of our forefathers. We must allow ourselves to create the unity that we seek, which we deserve, and create the collective bargaining that today's world and today's challenges provides for Africa. If we don't do that, we'll probably be regretting for another 200 years. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev Gupta from AFC there. I'm just going to go over to maybe one more person. Lee Stevens is a vice president at BNY Mellon. Let me get that right. BNY Mellon, right? Lee Stevens, perhaps introduce yourself. Tell the people who you are, and then maybe your reflections. We went to people like yourselves who, ordinarily, I said it was an eclectic crowd, and so I was so glad to see the likes of you and other banks and the Bank of Korea and so on. I'm not going to ask you a question. I'm just going to ask you to leave us with your final thoughts.
Well, thank you, Mark. My name is Lee Stevens. I'm an executive with the Bank of New York Mellon. We happen to be the world's largest global custodian. We facilitate more than 20% of investment flows around the globe. But that's not why I'm here tonight. I'm here tonight because I'm the immediate past chairperson for the MEDA, Africa Institutional Investor Advisory Council. And that's a collective of U.S. institutional investors, primarily U.S. public funds and endowments and foundations, representing almost $1 trillion in assets under management. And over the last 5 years, we've been working very closely with USAID, Prosper Africa, and the DFC to take our institutional investors to Africa to see the opportunities to invest. There's a strong interest there in infrastructure, strong interest in private equity, in venture capital. The lessons I learned tonight, because as one of our colleagues here from the American investment community, which is very, very conservative, one of the things that I learned tonight that I think is going to help accelerate U.S. investment is the value creation story. Seeing that Africa is more than simply the extraction of raw materials, passing it on to others who add value, and quite frankly, create investment return for institutional investors. As that happens on the continent, I'm absolutely confident that we will see more U.S. institutional investment on the continent.
Thank you very much. Round of applause for Lee Stevens. And the beautiful lady sitting next to him in arguably the most amazingly radiant color there is Amani Asfour, who is the president of the Africa Business Council. Here's a microphone. We've done this before, haven't we, you and I?
We did. So I know you want all to go back home, but my brother, you just spoke about cashew nuts?
Lloyd. She's
my brother, you just spoke about cashew nuts. I was just in Tanzania like 7 days ago with my sister from UNGP, with my brother ACFG about women in trade. and youth. And there is a young entrepreneur there that is adding value to the cashew nuts to have cashew butter. It's the first of its continent, on the continent, cashew butter. And we as Africa Business Council trying to support our women, our youth, our small and medium enterprises. So investment should be in mega project, but also should be really into the medium-sized project that would add value. Africa Business Council is established in line with the Heads of State Decision Summit to be the apex body of the private sector across the continent. It includes all the business council, COMESA Business Council, SADC Business Council, East Africa Chambers, West Africa Chamber. So our founding vision is competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment, and industrialization. One example about industrialization is about what you really said about the mining development, mineral development resources. All our minerals going out, and the gemstone, very small thing, all the gemstones go Jaipur, India, to be cut and polished there, and then sold to big designers like Bulgari, Christian Dior. They are not sold from the continent. So what we're trying to do and what we want to invest in is really about how we build the capacity of our African private sector to have industrialization. Another issue for investment for our here US investors, medical tourism. From Kano alone in Nigeria, per year, $2 billion goes outside the continent to be treated outside the continent for chemotherapy and radiotherapy. If we invest in oncology centers and radiotherapeutic centers on the continent, they will not go out. They will be treated on the continent. So we'll have access to health care, we will save money, and we will save lives. So this is real partnership that we want to come together for our African continent, the Africa we want. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Amanias 4. It is now 10 o'clock. You're welcome to stay and mingle. In fact, I'm going to get the Kora player starting again. But this event is co-convened, and really the person at the center of this event is going to make the vote of thanks and the closing comments very, very briefly. So I'm going to call on Ahuna Eziakonwa, Assistant Administrator and Regional Director for Africa for the United Nations Development Program. Please give her your attention. It's been quite a night. The microphone and the floor is yours. Close us out, Ahuna.
Yes, can we please give a round of applause for our MC? And a big thank you to Africa Center, Chini, Uzo, and Husna, also from the group here, all the ladies and gentlemen who made this possible, and of course to you, the participants. We weren't able to get round to everybody. Everyone in this room tonight was handpicked because we know that you burn for with passion for something. And that thing is to help Africa win. Because when Africa wins, the world wins. And we are at a World Assembly. And we're bringing Africa and Africa's voice to the world in a different way. This is a new voice of Africa. Tonight, what you've heard, it's about not just the potential of this continent, but its reality. Its reality is a promise. There is a promise on this continent, and entering it with that lens of promise as opposed to the lens of problem is where we stand tonight. Let's go win for Africa and for the world. Thank you all, and bless you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, where's my Kora player? Hold on a second, I'm going to direct you. This is the Africa Investment Partnerships Forum and Dinner. It's the first ever. I want to thank my colleagues. Dr. Joy Kategekwa, she doesn't like me to mention her name, but she was an amazing force to make this happen. Joanne, Ev, Hasna, Mintwab, of course the Africa Center yet again, they wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't have this without them. So for all of you, really, if I forget anybody, I do apologize. I want to say thank you for this. This was quite extraordinary. I now officially close the 2022 Africa Investment Partnership Forum. The theme was Africa Beyond Aid, a win for all. Kora player, take it away, my friend.